It's my real pleasure to be facilitating and to welcome three wonderful speakers on what has turned out to be a really, really popular topic. We've had over 200, I think about 230 people register for this. We know not everybody will join us for the live session, but it's clearly a topic that has struck some points of interest. And I think when we dive into the conversation, you'll see why. So let's get straight into it. I would first like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose ancestral lands UTS now stands. I would like to acknowledge them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this place and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all First Nations people joining us today. And as always, I welcome anybody who would like to let us know where you're joining from to do so in the chat as we continue our introductions. For anybody who hasn't been to a meetup before, and I know many of you won't have because we don't always open them out beyond UTS, we run them quarterly at UTS, and we run them across various different themes based on all kinds of things, depending on what we can hear people interested in and talking about and so on. So you can see earlier this year, we started off by sharing a meetup introducing the postgraduate learning design framework for quality standards in digital design. In March, we followed that up in May with a dive into learning analytics. That was also a panel with some speakers, which included Kirsty Kitto, Donna Rooney, and Danny Liu from University of Sydney. That was also very well attended. We switched things up in September with a Pecha Kucha meetup where we had 5 speakers talk about a really interesting topic, actually, timing and pace in learning design. And we looked into curriculum, we went deep into the classroom, we played with media and looked at all the different ways we can learn to think differently about time and pace. And now, as we reach the last day in October, we're looking at leadership pathways. Let me introduce Mace to just briefly say why we're having this particular collaboration with Ascolite on this particular webinar, and just to share a bit more information about that. Go ahead, Mace.
Thank you, Lucy. Welcome, everyone. I also would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people from where I am Zooming in today here at UTS campus. And also from my heart, I acknowledge the Aboriginal people who are currently suffering through the process of occupation. TELedvisors is another network. It's a very popular network, again, for you who are involved in this learning, educational technology sphere. So the mission of this network is basically to promote the significance of the role of TELedvisors, tertiary education, and foster that collaboration among us here in Australia and New Zealand. And also we've got a lot of people also participating in the same in similar conversations from other parts of the world. So we share innovative practices, identify opportunities for advancing technology enhanced learning. The other great thing about this network, it also hosts webinars. As you can see here, we've got a sample of the webinars that took place over Zoom mainly. Yeah, the turn-up for these webinars and the topic, as you can see, diverse and great. Communicating with the team and the SIG or the TELedvisor, probably I should have mentioned it first that this is also part of the Ascolite bigger community, as they run several special interest groups. For this particular one, the TELedvisors special interest group, it's been led by people from the community. So Colin Simpson from Monash University used to be there, now moved to a different role, different domain. Wendy Teller from Monash University as well, Penny Wheeler from Australian Catholic University, and Henk, I'm going to say his name incorrect now, but bear with me, Hishso from QUT, Queensland University of Technology. Membership to this group is open for everyone. So I'll post the link to the TELedvisor SIG if you're not aware of it. As I know, we have now people from the meetup community joining today. So it's great to have a look at the work TELedvisors are doing and get in touch with them. And yeah, it's great. I think it's a great idea to join forces and have this topic discussed amongst these two communities. So thank you for everyone involved, and back to you, Lucy.
All right. Thank you, Mace. And just to build on what Mace was saying, this is not an isolated conversation, whether it's part of ASCALite or the UTS Meetup or any space. And this leadership conversation is actually building on something that we first started talking about probably for the 10th time about 2 years ago, when we ran a meetup about who designs the learning designer. And in that, we dived into a little bit, including some speakers on a panel, what we understood to be the skills of a learning designer and how they can build them and so on. And you can see, if you just, there's a lot of detail on here, but if you just look through that central thread, some familiar sounding skills of understanding, designing, building, managing, and evaluation and learning. We didn't really linger on the leading aspects there. And that's particularly interesting when, if you look at all of these, really leadership is built into every single one of these skills in different ways. And one of the things we hope to do during the course of today's discussion is start to surface that a little bit more, and particularly for those of you who are building your own learning design careers, to start to raise and develop awareness of actually some of those skills you may not be aware you're already building, and start to link to more ways that you can build those. So we're going to stick to what we hope will be a fairly structured process today. We're going to let the speakers share a little bit about their context and their career experiences. Within those, hear more about their career highs and lows, particularly what's enabled and perhaps got in the way of some of their own career moves. And then we're going to broaden out, look into the skills and competencies for leading, and also within that, different ways of leading, because we know it can mean so many different things in different contexts. Okay, here they are. They'll be spotlighted in a moment when I stop sharing my slides, but our three speakers today are Amanda Lizier. Amanda Lizier is from UTS. She's a researcher and lecturer and teaching and learning coordinator in the School of International Studies and Education. We have Tam Nguyen from UNSW. Tam is the Director of Education Design and Digital Development in the Business School, and Kelly Patterson joining us from Perth. Kelly is the Director of Circular Learning. She's also a learning designer and a teacher trainer. And whilst I was going to read out each of their bios in detail, I think what has struck me when I looked across all of their bios, and what we'll hear about today, is both the cross-sector and the transdisciplinary nature of each of their backgrounds, the different things that they've done and the different strings that they've brought together in their journeys through leading, I think will be a particularly interesting thing to listen out for. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And whilst we spotlight those three panel members, there they come, I would like to invite each of them. For this part, I will suggest you in order. So let's start perhaps with Tam, to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about where learning design comes into your role, and perhaps in a few minutes, just your career journey so far.
Okay, where do I start? I might start at a very relevant point and just go quickly through very quickly my career pathway. So I started in an academic role in a faculty in the higher education sector, and I had the academic role for about more than 10 years. And then I chose at some point in time to move much more into teaching in education. So it was something that I really wanted to pursue. I think the 40-40-20 academic role just wasn't quite right for me. So that led me very naturally to education and understanding what education is. Learning design was actually something that I didn't realize existed. You sort of have an assumption of what it is when you're an academic until you get exposed to it in other sectors. So when I did leave the university, I did join the private sector and got exposed to learning design in very different contexts. And I think that gave me a little bit of information about what learning design is, how it should be structured. And since then, it's stayed with me. So it's never left me. And coming back to the higher education sector, it's taken on a very different form. But My career has been quite mixed. It's been public sector, private sector, it's been central university roles, it's been faculty roles, it's been professional, it's been academic. So if you were to summarize my career, it would be a mixed bag.
Perfect. Thank you, Tam. Kelly, go ahead. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, where learning design comes in.
Sure. So I'm co-founder of Circular Learning. We're based in Perth. It's me and the amazing Sandra Horton who founded Circular Learning together. I came into learning design. I had a background as an English as a second language teacher for adults. And I think that laid a really strong foundation because I was taught how to teach lessons that focus on how people learn. So the importance of context, scaffolding, chunking, recycling. And that kind of led into some learning design work. So then I kind of moved out of teaching and held academic and then institutional management roles. And designing courses kind of became part of those roles, but within my subject area, so within my context. And then I started freelancing in the kind of backdrop of COVID, which really changed the international education sector. And I started working in learning design outside of my context. So working with subject matter experts, working in government and corporate settings. And now here I am.
Fabulous. I think we're going to hear a lot more about those contexts. One of the things I found fascinating when we caught up before this was learning design for ambulances or something. There's so many different contexts in which people suddenly end up finding themselves in learning design. It's such an interesting journey, but we'll come back to that. Amanda, last but not least, tell us a little bit about you.
So I have probably a really, similar background to the other two speakers, but in that I'm the opposite of Tam. So I started in industry and ended up being an academic. So my very first job, once I worked out I didn't want to work in a bank, was as what was then called an instructional designer and technical writer for Woolworths supermarkets. And I discovered I really enjoyed that. I got into some further study at UTS. And that was a fantastic, I guess, undergirding for what I ended up doing, because it gave me a bit of the learning design, that creative, the putting things together, excuse me, and also how to do it for other people if I wasn't running it, excuse me. So we would do the design work in a central team and then give it to facilitators to run. So a lot of those consulting sort of skills, how to write something that someone else can comprehend, and how to structure things in a technical writing sense. So I kind of bounced around in industry for a while, and then got a bit frustrated with that, thought I'd like to take on some research. And so switched to freelancing and started doing my PhD, looking at workplace and professional learning. And so stayed in the same sort of space. And now that's what I teach and research in. But I've always done some type of learning design. So ultimately in industry, I ended up a bit like Kelly, going into management roles, learning and organizational development manager. And there was always a component of learning design. And even in my current role, there's subjects, curriculum discussions, how do we put things together, activity ideas, all of those things. I don't think I've had a single role that didn't involve some element of learning design.
Yeah, fabulous. And I can hear themes already. I'd love you all to take us a little bit deeper into those stories. And it's pretty clear already that none of your career paths have been a straight up one ladder in one particular place from one run to the next, which I think is what we all imagine our careers will be like at the age of 18. Talk us through, whoever wants to jump in first. Can you remember any of those kind of key pivot points, any moments that led to a different direction in your learning design career journey? What were they and how did they happen?
I can remember probably two big ones. One is I decided to do research. So that took me on a different pathway. But an earlier one, this first job I had at Woolworths, really enjoyed it. And I got to bounce around the department, do lots of different things. But I worked out that I felt a bit limited just doing the learning design stuff. And that what I needed was a bit more context. And I
then decided, okay, I need to move on. I need end-to-end learning and development experience. I need to see where it ends up. I need to be involved in the conversations at the beginning so that I can influence them. I've developed a lot of expertise. I think I can offer more here. And so that was a big decision point, which I've never regretted. I ended up moving into pharmaceuticals and taking on, more of a internal consultant sort of role. So still a lot of learning design, but really getting in there at the beginning and being able to ask questions, establish needs, all of that sort of stuff, which was a little bit lacking. And that was a really big turning point, because then I could bring in all those other skills that I worked out I needed and start to build them.
Yeah, great. Tam or Kelly, turning points.
I can go next if you like.
Oh.
For me, it's the biggest turning point was moving sectors. So I've been in the tertiary or the higher education sector for quite a long time, or well, the university sector for a long time. And I took a step to move out of that into the private sector, still in sort of education, but completely different environment, completely different context, and move cities as well. So it was a big move. It was a turning point because it exposed me to a very different way of doing things. It allowed me to follow the what ifs more and challenge myself. So I knew the higher education sector really well, and this took me beyond my comfort zone. And I think that was a really big turning point for me. It was uncomfortable because there's a lot of ambiguity in that. But it showed me things that I would not have seen if I stayed in the sector. And I brought that back with me, and that helped define myself and where I wanted to go with my expertise. And that was transformative for me.
Yeah, great. And Kelly, you mentioned COVID. I don't know if that's your big turning point, or if there are others that you identify as well.
Well, I think as a result of COVID and kind of reevaluating all what's happening to the industry I work in and where am I going to go with this, my biggest turning point, I think, was I went and did postgraduate studies in project management. And that just kind of gave me a complementary skill set. So I was able to lead really complex projects. It helped me build credibility outside of like the education sector, where people don't always really understand what a learning designer does. And when I could come with, well, I can lead the project from this project management standpoint, that's when I really started being awarded big government tenders. You mentioned before, Lucy, one of them was for the Department of Fire and Emergency Services, which was really interesting work, but I don't think I would have got it without the project management qualifications and experience as well. So that kind of rounded out my experience, I think, because I already knew what kind of a leader I was from running pathway colleges. I knew how to design great learning experiences, and this just meant I could manage the business side of it as well as a freelancer.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And in sharing that next deeper level of your experiences, you've prompted a great question from Colin in the chat, who's asking, what lessons do you think the different sectors can learn from each other in terms of doing learning design well? Straight into the complex ones. What have you seen? What could higher ed learn from corporate, or corporate learn from vocational, or what do you reckon?
I think we can learn better how to justify what we do and what value we add. So I'm sure we all talk about it in a different language depending on which sector we're working in. And I know a lot of the time I have to explain the benefit of learning design in almost a non-educational way for corporate and government. And I think if we get better across all sectors of justifying what we do and the benefits in different language, it will be useful. Yeah.
Yeah,
I have to agree with Kelly around the language. I think it's you do come across different languages, not just in terminology that's used to describe certain things, but also the language of design is slightly different as well. And the more exposure you get to these different languages, the richer your own skill set becomes, not just in design, but in how you manage that design with others, how you lead others, a whole range of things. And I know that when I left the university, I came across hardcore agile methodologies, which sometimes you think doesn't have a place in the type of learning design we understand it, but it does if you actually just reconfigure it. You know, so there's lots of lessons learned in being exposed to different languages and different contexts, but also how you actually feed that back into the sort of context you're in.
There's a quick follow-up on that from Marina in the chat, asking about any examples of how the language is different. And I think, Tam, you perhaps shared one there about kind of agile, I guess is more than just an example of the language, but, you know, something conceptually that slips between sectors in different ways. But do any of you have kind of examples in your mind of how you're seeing the language of learning design used differently across those different contexts?
Yeah, I can think, it's probably not overly specific, but in sort of general terms, just reflecting on it, that, you know, in higher education, I've also worked in vocational education, it's quite a different environment because the focus of what you're trying to do is very much the learner. And I realize that sounds really odd, because why wouldn't the learner be the focus? But in industry, there are competing interests there. You know, the focus is on the learner, indeed, that they need to learn, but actually the impetus to the learning may be a business need. Whereas, so the language then is very much around, you know, strategic alignment and business goals and, you know, value for money, return on investment, those sort of things. And I think when you're in an educational institution, those things are there, but they're not foregrounded quite as much. And so then the focus is more on, you know, the learner experience, the learner journey, because, you know, the whole purpose of the organization is there to teach people. And so I think that's a really big difference.
And I think even on the most basic level, some of the projects I've worked on, the kind of project leaders or from the organisation haven't heard of a learning outcome before. Like, it's not their area at all when you're saying, you know, well, what are the learning outcomes you want to achieve, or they don't know how to articulate that. They've never thought of it in that way.
Yeah, so it's building that awareness of the fact that people may not have those same backgrounds and understandings, and not making any assumptions about that when we go into those. Okay, I'm going to share a poll to ask the audience to join in a moment, but just before we do, I wonder, as part of those career journeys you've been on, have you experienced any significant barriers to your own career progression that you'd like to share?
I think my biggest barrier is myself. You know, like that idea of, can I do this? What, you know, should I go for this? Like, actually, you know, stopping yourself from achieving. And I think we probably have all done that at stages, everyone listening as well. So, yeah, I think we just need to be aware that sometimes we're our own biggest hurdle.
I agree with that. For me, it's there's sort of two barriers that keep coming up over and over again. The first is it's very easy to be lost within yourself when you're actually a designer. There are things that you know and the things that you share with like-minded people, but connecting with people and bringing people along on that journey has always been a bit of a barrier, because how do you describe that practice of design when some of it's so internal? It's hard to capture, it's hard to describe. And that's always been a bit of a barrier, is trying to find ways to actually describe to people what it is that you mean and feel and see in the practice of learning design. The second is just organizational barriers. So if you're in a university, then most of the leadership roles that you come across in learning design are academic. And so unless you are on that academic pathway, it's very difficult to actually find the leadership roles. So that's always been a bit of a barrier. It's easy in the corporate sector. You can find plenty of them there in the vet sector. But in universities, it's still very difficult to actually land those more senior management roles.
Yeah. Thank you. Mace, I'm going to put your question or I'm going to ask the speakers to look at your question whilst we launch the poll, and we'll come back to it after the poll. It's a great question. Audience, as part of the background for this, we did a bit of reading, and Mace in particular did a lot of very helpful reading. One of the articles that we looked at identified 8 skills or competencies for learning designers who are looking at developing leadership skills. And the poll that I am launching now asks you to just look down that list of 8 and identify which 3 you think are most important for learning designers. So you should be able to go ahead and put your choices in. You can choose more than 3 if you must, but I'd love you to just choose 3. Whilst they're doing that, panel, if you can see Mace's question, it's about leading change. It's a great one. I'm just going to give you 10 more seconds to answer the poll. It's a very dynamic poll. It's going up and down all over the place. 5, 4, 3, 2. Okay, I reckon most of you have answered now. Okay, interesting. So I'm going to share the results. You should be able to see them pop up. So at the top, interesting. Okay, so at the top with 68%, we've got teaching, learning, design, and technology expertise. Second up, we've got communication, 59%. And then next one down is interpersonal people skills. And just behind that, project management, and then some of the other ones coming. I have some comments I'd like to make on that, but any comments from you speakers? The top one people have come up with is teaching, learning, design, and technology expertise.
I think that was the first one I picked as well. I mean, yeah. You can't do the job without a background in it, and that's what you bring to the table. We've talked a bit already about, educating others, and I think that's really what you bring, is that expertise to help bring other people along on the journey with you. Why do you need learning outcomes? Why is that important? What's the best way to do this, rather than just let's get everyone in a room and kill them with PowerPoint and those sort of things. So I think it's critical. I agree with that.
Yeah, I'd have to differ a little bit. Yeah, I find that in my career, the more senior roles I get, the less the expertise becomes important. So for me, expertise is important for myself, but I find with others, and when I actually interact with others, it's they're wanting more of a level of trust and understanding and empathy rather than expertise, and I find that becomes much more of the foreground. And it's interesting to see organizational politics and relationships there, because I would say that would be one of the top for me. As I progress in my career, that becomes more and more important. So yeah.
Yeah, I found that fascinating too. Kelly, anything stand out to you here?
Well, I think coming from a small business perspective, I think being able to do the stuff is important, the teaching, learning, and design. But for me, as I mentioned before, it's the project management side of it as well, and the interpersonal people skills, and being able to kind of switch what that looks like depending on what the project you're working on is and who the client is.
I think that segues quite nicely into Mace's question. We do have another poll question, but I'm going to put it aside for now. So Mace was asking, how do you perceive the role of learning designers in leading change? So, for example, organizational restructure. What specific qualities or attributes do you think are essential for them to effectively drive change? This is a very juicy question, but who wants to go first?
I can have a go at it. Gosh, I think we all do quite a lot of change, but I have to say definitely the designers in my team are neck deep in change. And design itself is a bit of a change for academics. So there isn't many parts of the learning design process that doesn't involve change of some sort. I certainly think designers are change agents. They're important elements to it, but they're not the only change agents. I think it's important that they work with other change agents as well to affect that change. Change is not sort of isolated to one area. And I think the skill set that is really important to affect that sort of change is really the ability to bring people along with you, to the ability to engage people, to develop a sort of a mutual trust there, a rapport, and to bring people along on that journey, especially if what you're presenting is not something they may agree with, or something outside their comfort zone, or something unfamiliar. Then definitely the ability to bring people along with you would be really important.
Yeah, Amanda, I know you've done a lot in the change space as well. What do you think about this area of learning designers and leading change?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Tam was just saying then. You're part of a team ideally. And there were times in my career where I've been brought in quite late in the process. So, installing an entire new system, and we've just worked out we have to, quote, train people, design something. So it is really important. And I think I'd add to what Tam was saying in terms of bringing people along. I think one of the critical skills that learning designers can bring is that knowledge of how to help people see things differently, which is so key to a change process. And I think another key skill that learning designers need anyway, but particularly with change, is this idea of what I would sort of call strategic consulting, being able to ask good questions to really get to the root of what needs to happen here, what's really happening, rather than just listening to people tell you, the number of times in my career I've had people walk up to me and say, oh, we need communication skills training. I'd be very rich if I got paid every time. But really working out what's happening here and what can we really do to help at a person to person level, I think is really something that we can bring to the table.
Yeah, great. Kelly, did you want to add anything to that? Because otherwise we're going to jump into some of the leading skills and how you develop skills for leadership in your team.
Yeah, I don't think I've got anything extra to add to that. I agree with what both Tam and Amanda said.
Yeah. Fabulous. I can see a few more questions coming through, but just one of there's already been a question about where those kind of 8 competencies came from, and I think Mace or someone else will hopefully share the link back to that paper. But there's been lots of people have written already, not only about learning design skills, but leadership skills for learning designers, and variously have highlighted different areas of leadership that could be worked on with learning designers. But what about in your own experience? What are the leading skills that you have found to be most important, whether it's for yourself or I know we've all talked about teams that you've led as well, and leaders that you've nurtured yourself?
Can I comment on that? Because I saw Stephen Robinson's comment there about time management needs are often a mask for other issues, which I think is a really good point. Going back to your question around sorry, it's a leadership skills in designers. Yeah, I find one of the things that I find personally very beneficial is context awareness. I don't know if you'd define that as skill or anything, but understanding the bigger picture, the web, the interdependencies of things, and the context that other people may be coming from, and sometimes that's hidden. Such as the time management issue that, yes, we come across academics that are time poor and there's no time for things, but there are reasons for that behind that. And then sometimes it's organizational, sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's a whole heap of things. And I find one of the important leadership skills from my perspective is that context awareness, understanding that bigger picture and understanding that there are interconnections and interdependencies everywhere, that systems thinking, and that it's not just an isolated piece of thing, that it belongs to something greater. And trying to understand what that greater is really does help.
Yeah, there has to be a connection across here, Amanda, to practice theory, the practice architectures and all those kind of areas. Do you want to share a little bit about that particular view on leading practices?
Yeah, so some of the sort of research and teaching that I do picks up what you probably call like sort of systems theories in the social sciences. So practice is one of them. Complexity is something that I've done a bit of work with, but I absolutely agree. Nothing, and particularly not learning, happens in isolation. And we know this, we're in a network of other people, but we're also in a network of things, of ideas, social political contexts, all of it. And being able to tease that apart and help others do it is really key and something you can build. And I think it sort of ties in a bit to my earlier comment around that consulting, being able to ask good questions, be able to channel that, what you're seeing around you into, well, let's try and really get to the nitty-gritty here. And I think this is where also, it sounds really boring, but things like project management come into it, because at the end of the day, you still have to produce a thing. And so for all the complexity, then how do you get from point A to point B with all the bumps in between? And that's where those sort of skills become really, really important. But in terms of the complexity sort of stuff as well, this is where interpersonal skills come in. If you're part of a network, not just having those close connections is important, which we sort of alluded to before, having other change agents, part of the team. But then you've also got to think about long links. Excuse me. And that's often where innovation and ideas come from. So the idea is you've got your team, your people you work with the most. But in a social network, where the innovation really comes from is the weaker links, the longer ties to other teams, to other institutions. That's where you get the fresh ideas in. And so that's also a really important thing to keep in mind, that yes, you're in your organization and maybe in your faculty or your department, wherever you are, but keeping your head up and looking around at what's everyone else doing and, how else can we tie into this is critical.
Yeah, great. Kelly, did you want to expand on any of those?
I think I want to add to them. Mine are less kind of complex and academic, but something that I really find that brings efficiency and also job satisfaction to Sandra and I in our businesses. We do a lot of strengths mapping. So whenever we get a project, we break it down into the components of what it is and see where my strengths are and where her strengths are, and how we'll tackle that project, and what skills we need to bring in from the outside as well. So I think that can make the learning design process efficient and enjoyable. But also from a business point of view, it makes it cost beneficial as well, because if we're tackling what our strengths are, we're not spending additional time on tasks that then we have to bill to the clients. So mine's not as complex and academic as Tam and Amanda's, but it's something I've really found is important in leadership, in learning design in small business.
And actually, I think that's a fantastic work, because I've used the strength stuff as well when I had a team of learning designers working with me, and it was so useful. And then coupled with some project management approaches, so I'd use RACI, so responsible, accountable, consult, inform. And so then we could almost have a matrix. We had one person who was really good at editing, and so they loved doing that, and a few of us who didn't. And then we could, okay, well, you'll be responsible for these sections. These are the people, we'll just consult with you because that's not really your thing. And you can really bring it together. So that's a really great point.
Yeah. RACI is a fabulous framework to use in a project. Yeah.
So I can hear you going broader, and you're looking at context, and you're looking at influencing and working with people and understanding, reading the room and all this kind of thing. And then in swoops a question from Tom, great question. How much about learning do learning designers need to know? And let's extend this into learning designers who would like to develop leading skills. And so he says, do they need to have educational qualifications as well as training in learning design? What's the package that we're looking at here, and how much learning?
I have strong opinions. I'd like to go last.
I can go first. I don't have strong opinions. I like to use an analogy to help understand this. And I sort of sometimes compare learning design to building a house. There are structural components, there is functional components, and then there's experiential components. And you have specialists in sometimes one or two of these, and sometimes all of them. So you could be a learning designer that is a specialist. You can really focus on the structure of a house, or you can really focus on the flow of one space to the other, or you can really focus on the experiential components, making something look really nice and feel really nice. Or you can step back and be the architect who isn't the specialist, but can see the holistic, the whole, and put them all together. So to answer your question, I don't know if this is answering your question, but I think there are many types of designers, and you can actually tackle it in different ways. It depends on if you want to be a specialist or generalist, or a combination of both, or where your strengths are, if you want to look at strengths, and whether you want to leverage that and really push that, or you want to develop other areas that aren't strong. It really depends on where you want to go and how you want to present yourself. I think having skills and knowledge is really important, but equally so are the attributes that are needed to really lead in this area. So I think I'd break it down into 3 areas for design. Expertise is important, and that's what we just covered then. But so is the ability to form relationships and nurture those relationships, and the ability to see the organizational needs and the contexts that may not be immediate to you. So that covers certain attributes that I'd say would need to be sort of developed in the same vein as the expertise.
I can't wait to hear Amanda's strong opinion, but Kelly, do you have a moderate opinion you'd like to pop in?
Yeah, I do have a moderate opinion, and I think this comes back to when we all introduced ourselves at the start. We all kind of fell into learning design. I don't think anyone, finishes high school and says, I'm going to be a learning designer, and jumps straight into a degree in learning design. I think it's something that you arrive at. And then your experience in the past helps to build your skills in learning design. But I also think one of the key components, you obviously have to know about learning. And the best way to do that is to always be a learner and reflect on what you're learning, and how you learn, and what was difficult, to help you be a better designer.
Thanks, Kelly. You earned yourself a heart from Mace there. Amanda.
I'm not sure how completely controversial this is. I actually agree with what everyone said. I think my position is probably a bit stronger on the expertise, or at least a working knowledge of, because if you don't have that, what's your basis for influencing, I suppose. So I absolutely agree. You need the other skills as well. But I think what I've seen over my career, and I agree, people tend to fall into this role, and that's where it gets really interesting. If you've got someone who's sort of come into a learning design role, but don't necessarily have a background, so they're learning through experience, they're learning through what's happened in that organization before, but then they have a really limited toolkit. So it's a bit like, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so you do end up with probably a bit less innovation in some cases, because there's a bit less to build on. And so that's where I think it's, and even the idea of specialist and generalist, I think that's an important one. But to me, though, if you don't at least have a working knowledge of across the board, you can go deep in one space, but unless you know how all the pieces come together, I think then you're going to really struggle to produce something that's going to meet the need, and also to identify what, going back to this idea of what's happening around. We're really trying to get to the root cause. If you only ever do the same type of stuff because you lack the expertise or lack the background, I think you're going to be really limited in your career and quite limited in what you can provide as well. So that's where I don't think it has to be formal qualifications, although obviously I have a vested interest in saying you should, but I agree. I think you should be a learner, be open to new ideas, get a bit behind you so that you can make informed commentary on why you would do something a certain way, rather than just this is the latest cool thing. Because in the learning world, particularly in industry, I think it can be quite a fad-based place from time to time. At one point in my career, I think I spent 18 months solid just running emotional intelligence training because that was the fashionable thing at the time. So yeah, I saw Kelly's face then. Yes, it was as bad as it sounds. So yeah, that's my not that controversial but quite passionately held idea that I think you get yourself into trouble if you don't have a strong enough background to know why you would do it a certain way.
Yeah, I love how none of your answers as well are simple and black and white. You're all kind of, none of this topic is, just do this and then you'll be a learning design leader, off you go. We're going to, in the final section, move into a few different ways of leading. But before we do that, let me share the other question that we had for the audience. And this is an open text one. So it's asking you'll see it pop up in a minute, how can learning designers develop their leadership skills? And we'll leave it up to you as to whether you want to think about who do you develop them with, or what's the means, or anything else. But just going to shut up for 30 or 60 seconds whilst you add a few of your thoughts in there. Love to hear from you. Now's also a good time to pop any final questions into the chat. If you've got something you've been dying to ask, we'll try and get to it before the end of the session. Okay, I'm going to end the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, still coming through, that's good. Oh, you're all very fast writers. Okay, I can't end it yet, they're all still coming through. Okay, there's the cutoff. If you didn't get it in, you'll have to pop it in the chat. I'm just going to have a quick look at the answers there. Whilst I'm doing that, Tam, I wonder if you can talk a little bit, we've touched on it actually a little bit, this topic of leading by influence. But when we were preparing for this, quite a few of us talked about the fact that leading often isn't in your title, your job title, or your job spec, but it's something that you end up doing as part of a learning design bit of work. So how can learning designers develop these skills in leading when it's not part of their title?
I guess you could see leadership with positional authority, and then leadership without. I'm assuming you're referring to how would you lead without that positional authority. It's a tricky one, and I find in my career it's trying to what I've done is trying to sort of carve out a niche for myself. So really ask, what's the value that I provide for others? What is that? Is it I do Moodle incredibly well. No matter what it is, I'm the go-to person for Moodle. Or I can talk you through some aspects of how you might develop your curriculum, and I'll be there with you. Or I'm the go-to person for assessment. It could be a whole heap of things, but for me, it's really down to value. So what value do you provide to others that you're working with? And that could be very specific or could be broad. And I find the clearer you are on that, the easier it is to influence people without the authority, because it just comes out really strong. It's like trying to shape a value proposition for yourself, for others. And once that's really clear, then I find influencing others to change so much easier. When that's not clear, then people are unclear about what you provide to them, or where you can help them. And I find that's been very strong throughout my career, that the stronger that is and the clearer that is to others, the more often they come back to you, the more they defer to you, and the more likely they will change behaviours and practices on your advice.
Yeah. Anything to add, Kelly or Amanda? I can see you both nodding furiously.
That's a really good answer. I like that. Well done, Dan.
Fabulous. I'm having some wonderful technical difficulties in the background, trying to see what everybody was writing in those. So whilst I figure out those, Amanda, we also talked about middle leading, and I know you've written about this quite a bit. There's obviously heaps in general management literature about being a middle manager and all the pressures there, but what about in higher education in particular, and or in learning design? What do we know about this space and the challenges, and perhaps how we can think about it?
That's a really good question. So middle leading, if you haven't come across the term, it actually comes from schools quite a bit. So the idea you might have a head teacher or a sort of subject expert who they maintain their own pedagogical, their own teaching and learning responsibilities, but then they're also expected to learn others. So they're a little bit sandwiched. If you read some of the papers, they talk about being seen as a spy, being the filling in the sandwich. Some people might be relating to this. I think learning designers can fit in here a little bit sometimes too, in the sense of not having that positional power, but needing to influence, but also still maintaining their own responsibilities for teaching and learning. Particularly, I've been looking in some research at sort of academics and looking at course coordinators, so people that manage courses, so master's courses or undergraduate courses, and they really fit into this area. And so they find themselves quite sandwiched. They're expected to manage people, resources, to be quite strategic. But on the other hand, they're still trying to do their day job. They're still trying to teach. They're still trying to help others with their teaching and learning. And it can be a really complex space. And I don't think I have all the answers yet, but what's been really interesting is finding out then what do people do in that space. So it's interesting to see that time comes up quite a lot in a lot of different ways. Time to do things, how we manage the time, how we then manage the resources to meet those things. How is time valued? Which tasks are valued in that space and which aren't? A lot of weighing up of priorities, those sorts of things. But yeah, it's a really interesting emerging space. And if you think about people in that area, we've talked about it a bit, trust and building relationships becomes an incredibly key part of that, because they are often operating in a space where they may have some people reporting to them, perhaps, but would you necessarily identify their role as a quote unquote leader? You may not necessarily, although that's what we're asking them to do. So yeah, trust is absolutely key. And you're building those relationships, and I guess bringing your expertise in to help bolster you in terms of your influence.
And there's lots of chat going on. This is obviously hitting another key. It's not hitting a nerve, but it's definitely hitting an interest point. Thanks, Solly, for sharing that you had a director of business risk tell you at point blank that she didn't believe in digital learning and was only working with you because she'd been told to do so by the partner. Definitely a challenging leading and influencing experience. Thanks so much. That's great. I'm sure everyone's got their own version of that too. Kelly,
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the perspective of leading. Quite a few people on this call, I think, are leading internally. They're leading with internal stakeholders and projects and so internally. But what about when you're working with external clients? And it's not your baby, but you're the consultant, I guess, in that. Where does leading sit then in learning design?
I think the challenge there is to be able to speak the same language as we touched on before. So sometimes they're not from an educational context at all. So we need to be able to, our leading comes in being able to communicate in a way that's relatable to them, I guess, and to be able to effectively communicate their role in this process. They're the people with the knowledge. They own the problem that needs to be solved, and we're the people who bring the knowledge of how to solve that problem through developing learning and assessment for them. That can become quite challenging in it's sometimes hard to get them to see things not in a we've always done it this way kind of mentality. And actually I had a bit of a breakthrough in my approach to that this year. I was lucky enough in the middle of the year to do a Chaos Pilot learning experience design course, and I saw Michael pop up on the chat earlier. He was in my cohort for that as well, and I really started to think what I took away from that was how to involve stakeholders in the design process to get different outcomes to what they've had before. So using that kind of design thinking double diamond framework, putting as much time into exploring the problem and guiding them through that as to finding the solution. And I think for me, the leadership happens there with people who don't necessarily understand teaching and learning and design, is to get them to pinpoint what knowledge, skills and attitudes they want their learners to have at the end to solve the problem they've got, and then being able to communicate well enough and demonstrate that you are the person that can lead the process to get them there. So I think that's how it's different with working with external.
Yeah, I think we could probably have an hour each on each of your kind of specialist subjects, but we have just a few minutes left. Jenny has managed to get into the answers that you all put to that open text question. So I'm going to ask Jenny to share her screen and we'll just have a quick look. Jenny's already identified that a massive theme here is about getting a mentor as part of developing leadership skills, but we can all see, thank you, Jenny, just let you briefly look over this. Thanks, Jenny. Practicing accountability. Yeah, there's heaps. Yeah, let's just have a very quick look at the second page. Mentoring's up again, shadowing. Lots of kind of networking. Yeah, there we go. Interesting. I wonder, by having three quite inspiring people on this call, whether we've put people in a mentorship headspace. So kudos to our panel for doing that. We'll have a look at those in more detail actually and do a bit of analysis on where you think those skills are coming from. I'm going to combine my final question with Kevin's from further up the feed. Kevin was asking, what does success look like in a learning design career? And my final question was going to be, what advice can you share for learning designers looking to develop their careers and skills? So you can tackle either, both, or neither of those. Tam, kick us off. What does success look like, or what advice would you like to share?
I'll have a go at that first question. I'm going to be very controversial here. And I've noticed there's a couple of my learning designers in this this sort of session, so cover your ears. For me, I think in the context that I work in, which is a university context, and really focus on developing academics to understand learning design better. And that's very much what we're focused on. To me, success would be learning designers are no longer needed. And I say that's very controversial, because if we were able to transfer everything we know about learning design to the people who teach it to students, I'd say that is a fantastic measure of success. And I don't mean that learning designers will become redundant. They may move on to other things. But what we're focusing on at the moment should be things that I think academic staff need to know. But the fact that the services exist at the moment means there's still work to be done to transfer that knowledge and skills over to the people who are actually teaching to our students. So that would be definitely a measure of success, that the learning designers in my team can actually move on to other things. And that all that knowledge is transferred over. I mean, we won't get rid of them, but they just move on.
Thanks, Tam. Kelly?
Well, I think success is going to look different for everyone. But for me, what success in a learning design career looks like is that I'm not stagnant. I'm constantly evaluating what skills I need or what knowledge I need, keeping aware of how the landscape's changing and how I need to react to that. And for me, success looks like reflecting on your own practice, doing gap fill like a gap analysis of the skills you have and what's needed to progress, and taking steps for them.
Thanks, Kelly. We're a minute over. No pressure, Amanda. Any final words from you?
Mine's very quick. I agree with everything. I think the advice I would share that's always served me well is volunteer for things that are outside your comfort zone. Put your hand up for the new project. Even if it seems a little left of field, it will probably be the thing that will push you to learn new things, new ways of dealing with people, new skills. And, I always say careers often happen in hindsight. And so after a little while, you'll suddenly discover you've built an amazing toolkit of learning design skills.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. We're only a minute over. That's not too bad. Everybody's been sticking around. Thank you, everybody. It's been a really wonderful session. We will make this recording available and no doubt keep on talking. And I hope you all keep on networking with each other. It's been a very lively chat there in the background. Thank you, Tam. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
See you next year.